AITA for not helping my parents financially after they gave my inheritance to my sister. So, 28F, have a bit of a situation that has caused some tension in my family, and I'm wondering if I'm the asshole here. A bit of background. I come from a pretty middle-class family. My parents have always been very strict but loving. My younger sister, 24F, and I grew up pretty similarly in terms of lifestyle. We weren't rich, but we were comfortable enough. A couple of years ago, my grandparents passed away. They weren't super wealthy, but they did have some savings and property. They left an inheritance for me and my sister, though I don't think they had a huge amount. The bulk of the inheritance was to be divided equally between us, with a few smaller items passed down, like my grandmother's jewelry, a couple of heirloom books, and my grandfather's old watch. I always assumed it would be a relatively simple process, but it turned into a mess. Here's where the story gets tricky. My sister has had a difficult time since she graduated from college. She's bounced between jobs, struggled with personal issues, and generally hasn't had her life together. Meanwhile, I've been steadily building my career and working hard to save money. I've always been more financially stable, even from a young age, and I've never needed much help from my parents. They've always been proud of my independence. A few months ago, my parents came to me and said that they were struggling financially due to some bad investments they made. Apparently, they had put money into a business venture that went south, and now they were in debt. My dad was really upset about it, and my mom seemed stressed out. I felt bad for them, but I was also confused because they had always been so financially responsible. They explained that they needed help, and since I was doing better than my sister, they were hoping I could step in and lend them some money. I told them I would think about it. But then the kicker came. My sister called me a few days later and told me that my parents had decided to give her most of my inheritance. She wasn't even asking for help at this point. She just wanted me to know. Apparently, they had decided that since my sister was in need and struggling, they were going to give her a larger portion of the inheritance to help her out. They said it was fair because she had more immediate financial problems than I did. Now, I'll admit I was shocked. I understand that my sister's life hasn't been easy, but it felt like a slap in the face. My sister wasn't even planning to use the inheritance responsibly. She was already talking about buying a car she couldn't afford and going on a vacation she didn't need. Meanwhile, I had been working my butt off, and I had always assumed that the inheritance would be divided equally. After all, we were both equally entitled to it, right? I tried to talk to my parents about how this wasn't fair. I explained that I didn't mind helping them out, but it felt wrong that they had given away most of my share of the inheritance without consulting me. I also pointed out that I wasn't in financial trouble like my sister, and it didn't make sense for her to get the lion's share when I was doing just fine on my own. My mom was incredibly defensive, saying that they were just trying to help my sister and that I should understand. She said I didn't need the money and that it would be a good thing for me to show compassion. My dad didn't say much but seemed to agree with my mom. At this point, I was really frustrated. It wasn't about the money for me. I wasn't expecting a huge payout or anything. It was the principle of the thing. I felt like my parents had favored my sister for years, bailing her out every time she messed up. And now, when it came to something that was supposed to be equally shared, they were making it clear that my sister came first. After thinking about it for a few days, I made a decision. I told my parents that I couldn't help them financially. If they were going to give my inheritance away without even discussing it with me, I didn't feel like I owed them anything. I also told them that I was disappointed in how they had handled everything. My dad was upset, and my mom cried, but I stood firm. I felt like I was finally standing up for myself. Now my sister is angry with me too. She says that I'm being selfish and that I should understand that my parents were just trying to do what they thought was best for her. She says that I'm being petty over money and that it's not a big deal. My parents are still upset and keep saying that I should be helping them, not making things worse. My extended family is split. Some agree with me, others think I should have just given them money and moved on. So, AITA for refusing to help my parents financially after they gave my inheritance to my sister? If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. It helps the content grow and motivates me to create even more awesome videos. Turn on notifications so you don't miss any new uploads. Thanks for your support. AITA for refusing to let my cousin stay at my house after she broke my trust. I, 29M, have a cousin, 27F. Let's call her Sarah, who I've been close to for a long time. We grew up together, and we've always been there for each other. We don't live in the same city, but we keep in touch, and whenever we're both in town, we try to meet up. Over the years, I considered Sarah more of a sister than just a cousin, so I was completely blindsided when she broke my trust a few months ago. I've always tried to be the supportive family member, whether it was helping Sarah move apartments, giving her advice, or just being a sounding board. I've done a lot for her. So when Sarah called me a few months ago asking if she could crash at my place for a week while she dealt with some personal stuff, I didn't hesitate to say yes. My apartment is small, but it's enough for one extra person to stay. I thought this would be a good time to catch up and support her. I made it clear that she could stay as long as she needed, but I was expecting her to be respectful of my space and the fact that I work from home. The first few days were fine. We talked, hung out, and I helped her figure out what she was going to do next. I knew she was going through a tough time, and I wanted to be a good host. But then things started to get weird. Sarah started making small comments about my lifestyle that I found a bit odd. She'd comment on how I decorated my apartment, how I spent my time, and even how I organized my finances. I brushed it off at first, thinking she was just venting or expressing frustrations from her own life. But then one day, I came home from work to find my apartment looking completely different. The furniture had been rearranged, and a bunch of things I kept in certain places had been moved. At first, I was confused. I thought maybe I had forgotten I'd asked her to help with organizing or something, but no. She had gone through my personal belongings, moved things around without asking, and, to make it worse, thrown out some stuff I was planning to use. I was pissed, but I tried to stay calm. I asked Sarah what happened, and she gave me a sheepish look and said, "I thought it'd look better this way. You're too cluttered." Now, I'm not a hoarder, but I do have a lot of books, gadgets, and personal items that mean something to me. I told Sarah that I appreciated her efforts, but she shouldn't be making those kinds of decisions without asking me first. She shrugged it off, and we moved on. The real issue came a few days later, though. I was at work, and when I got back, I found out that Sarah had invited a bunch of her friends over while I was gone. I didn't mind her having friends over, but it was the fact that she didn't ask, and she didn't even tell me about it until they were all there. I came back to my apartment filled with people I didn't know, laughing, drinking, and making a mess. I was caught off guard and uncomfortable, but I tried to be polite. As I walked in, one of her friends immediately started telling me that I was too uptight for not joining them for a drink. I tried to explain that I had a long day at work, and I just wanted some peace and quiet, but Sarah didn't seem to care. She just went along with the whole thing, and her friends made themselves at home. By the time the night ended, my place was trashed, and they didn't even offer to clean up. I stayed in my room to avoid confrontation, but I couldn't help but feel disrespected. This wasn't the kind of hospitality I had in mind. When her friends finally left, I confronted Sarah. I told her that I wasn't okay with what happened, that she had overstepped by inviting people over without even asking, and that I needed her to respect my home. She got defensive, saying I was being too harsh, and that she needed to let loose after everything she'd been going through. I told her that while I understood her need to unwind, my home was not the place for that. I was livid, but I also felt bad for making her feel guilty for something that clearly had a bigger emotional weight for her. It was a difficult conversation, but I thought we'd come to an understanding. The next day, things took a turn for the worse. I discovered that Sarah had been snooping through my personal things. I had a private diary I kept, and when I went to check on it, it was open on the table with a few of the pages visibly turned. I immediately knew she had read it. When I asked her about it, she didn't even deny it. Instead, she said, "I was just trying to understand you better." I was furious. Not only had she disrespected my space and my belongings, but now she had violated my privacy in a way that felt unforgivable. I told her she had crossed the line and that she could no longer stay in my apartment. She argued with me, saying she didn't mean any harm, but I was done. I told her I was giving her a few days to figure out an alternative place to stay because I just couldn't trust her anymore. This is where things got even worse. Sarah reached out to my parents, telling them that I was being unreasonable and that I was kicking her out while she was going through a tough time. My parents called me, trying to guilt me into letting her stay longer. They said I was being too harsh and that I should understand how hard her life had been lately. They even implied that I wasn't being a good family member. I tried to explain that I wasn't kicking her out because I didn't care, but because I couldn't tolerate the way she had treated me in my own home. My parents didn't get it, and I ended up having a huge argument with them. Eventually, they dropped the issue, but not without making me feel guilty for my decision. It's been a few months since all of this happened. Sarah and I haven't spoken much since the fallout, and while I still care about her, I'm not sure I can ever trust her again. I feel like I did the right thing by standing up for my boundaries, but the whole situation has left me feeling conflicted. My parents think I should apologize, but I'm not sure I owe Sarah that. She violated my privacy and disrespected my home, and I just can't let that slide. So, AITA for refusing to let my cousin stay at my place after she broke my trust? AITA for not wanting to invite my sister-in-law to my birthday party after she made a comment about my weight? I, 32F, have a bit of a family issue that's been weighing on me, and I'm wondering if I'm in the wrong here. So, for some context, I've always been someone who has struggled with weight. I've had ups and downs, but I've never been super thin. I've been trying to get healthier recently, and while I've made some progress, I'm still not exactly where I'd like to be. It's a slow process, and I'm okay with that. I've learned to love myself more at every size and have gotten a lot more comfortable with my body over the years. My husband, 35M, has a sister, Melanie, 38F, who I've always had a weird relationship with. From the beginning, she was very friendly, but a little overbearing, constantly commenting on how I should eat or exercise differently. She's always been very thin and active, and while I get that she's just trying to help, her comments often come off as patronizing or judgmental. I've spoken to my husband about it, and he said that he's had similar issues with her, but he doesn't want to cause any drama in the family by confronting her. So, I'll just try to brush it off, even though it's been a bit of a strain on our relationship. My birthday was last week, and I was really excited about it. I've always kept my celebrations pretty low-key, usually inviting close friends and family to a small dinner or a get-together. This year, I wanted to do something a little bigger, so I rented a small venue and invited a mix of people from work, friends, and family. My husband was supportive, and I thought it was going to be a great time. I sent out invitations a couple of weeks in advance, and I was looking forward to spending time with people I actually enjoy. I knew that Melanie would be coming because she's pretty involved in our family, but I wasn't too worried about it. She's been invited to all of my past birthdays, and even though I wasn't super close to her, I tried to be polite. The problem started when I was chatting with my sister on the phone a few days before the party. I was telling her about the plans and how I was feeling good about everything, and she was asking about who was coming. When I mentioned Melanie's name, my sister immediately asked, "Are you sure you want to invite her? Doesn't she always make those rude comments about your weight?" I was a little taken aback, but I told her that I wasn't going to let Melanie's comments get to me this year. I didn't want to let her ruin my celebration. The day of my birthday party arrived, and I was in high spirits. The venue was beautiful, and everything was set up perfectly. Guests started arriving, and I was so happy to see everyone. But when Melanie arrived, I felt that familiar tension in the air. She immediately made a beeline for me, and we exchanged pleasantries, but she wasted no time in making a comment about how great I looked. Now, I know she was trying to be nice, but her tone just rubbed me the wrong way. It felt more like a backhanded compliment. She said something like, "Wow, you're looking so much better than the last time I saw you. You've really been working on it, huh?" I smiled awkwardly and said, "Thanks, Melanie," but inside, I was fuming. It wasn't a compliment. It was her way of saying that I looked bad before, and now I looked better. As the night went on, Melanie kept making these comments. At one point, she pulled me aside to ask if I was really going to eat that when I reached for a slice of cake. I tried to laugh it off, saying that it was my birthday, but inside, I was just getting more and more frustrated. It wasn't the first time she'd said something like that, but it was the first time it had made me feel this hurt. I was surrounded by friends and family, trying to enjoy my evening, and yet she was making me feel self-conscious and uncomfortable. At this point, I was done. I found my husband and told him I needed to have a private conversation with him. I told him that I was done with Melanie's comments, that they were ruining my night, and that I didn't want her around anymore. He was shocked and said that I was overreacting, but I explained how much it had been bothering me. After a few minutes of back and forth, he reluctantly agreed to talk to her. By the time my husband confronted Melanie, things had already escalated. She was drunk, and her comments became even more pointed. She told him that I was too sensitive and that I needed to stop making everything about me. I overheard part of the conversation, and it was clear that she didn't get how much she was hurting me. I went into the bathroom to collect myself for a bit, and when I came back, my husband told me that Melanie had left the party. I was upset, and part of me felt vindicated, but another part of me just wanted to enjoy my birthday. The rest of the night went smoothly, and I got a lot of support from my friends and family. However, once the party was over, Melanie texted me. She said that I was being ridiculous and that she didn't understand why I couldn't take a joke. She added that I should be grateful she cared enough to say something about my weight and that I was being dramatic by not letting it go. I haven't responded to her text yet, and I'm considering just cutting ties with her entirely. But I'm also second-guessing myself. AITA for asking my husband to talk to her, and for considering not inviting her to any more family events because of how she treated me on my birthday. AITA for not letting my best friend stay at my place after she lied to me about her relationship. I, 28M, have been best friends of Karen, 27F, since we were kids. We've always been there for each other, through thick and thin, and I consider her like family. Over the years, we've shared a lot of personal things, supported each other through breakups, job changes, family issues, and just about everything life has thrown our way. I always thought that there was nothing that could break our bond. That is, until recently. The problem started when Karen called me up a few months ago, asking if she could stay at my place for a week. She was going through a tough time with her relationship, and I immediately said yes. Karen had been dating her boyfriend, James, for about 2 years, and everything seemed fine from what I knew. I didn't know the specifics of what was going on between them, but Karen told me that she needed space from him and needed somewhere to stay while she figured things out. At the time, I thought this would be a good opportunity for us to hang out and catch up. We hadn't spent a lot of time together recently, and I thought it would be nice to have her at my place for a while. I made sure she knew that she was welcome to stay for as long as she needed, and I would help her however I could. I also told her that I worked from home and was on a tight schedule, so I needed her to be mindful of that. She was fine with everything, and we agreed that she would stay with me for the week. The first few days were fine. Karen and I spent some time chatting, eating takeout, and watching movies. She seemed a little down, but nothing that stood out too much. But then things started getting a bit weird. Karen was on the phone a lot, often leaving the room to take calls or texting nonstop. I didn't think much of it at first, since she was going through a tough time with her relationship, and maybe she just needed to talk to her friends or family. But one night, after a particularly long phone call, Karen came back to the living room and sat down with me. She was upset, and I could tell that something was bothering her. She told me that her relationship with James had been falling apart for a while, and that they were basically broken up but hadn't officially called it off yet. I asked her what had been going on, and she said that they had been fighting a lot, and James had been acting distant. She didn't go into too much detail, but she said that she had tried to make it work, but it just wasn't happening anymore. I was sympathetic. I told her that I was there for her, and that if she needed to talk about anything, I was all ears. She seemed really relieved to finally open up, and I was glad she trusted me enough to share what was going on. After that conversation, Karen seemed a lot more relaxed, and I thought that things were going to get better for her. But what I didn't know was that Karen was still in constant contact with James. She was texting him, calling him, and even seeing him behind my back. Over the next few days, I started noticing some things that didn't add up. For example, Karen would be acting like everything was fine when she was with me, but then I would hear her sneaking out of the house early in the morning or late at night to meet up with James. I didn't confront her about it at first because I didn't want to pry, but the more I noticed it, the more it started to bother me. One evening, I was sitting on the couch working when Karen came into the living room, acting a little strange. She seemed anxious, and her phone was buzzing nonstop. Finally, I asked her if everything was okay. She hesitated for a moment, then told me that she had made up with James and they were back together. I was taken aback. I asked her why she didn't tell me this sooner, especially after she had told me that they were basically broken up. She looked uncomfortable but said, "I didn't want to make you feel bad. I just needed time to think, and I didn't want to bother you with it." At this point, I was feeling frustrated. Not because she got back together with James, I knew it was her decision, but because she had lied to me. She had come to me asking for help, telling me that she needed space from him, and I had been there for her. I had opened up my home, my time, and my energy to support her, and all along, she had been sneaking around behind my back, seeing him again. I told her that I didn't appreciate being lied to, especially when I had been so open and honest with her. She tried to justify her actions, saying she didn't want to hurt me and that she wasn't sure about her relationship at first. But I was upset. I had been nothing but supportive, and yet she had deceived me. I told her that she needed to leave. Karen was shocked. She tried to convince me that I was overreacting, that I was being too harsh, and that I was supposed to be her friend. But I couldn't just let it go. I felt betrayed, and honestly, I didn't feel comfortable having her stay at my place anymore after everything that happened. I told her that she needed to find somewhere else to stay, and that I didn't want her to continue using my place as a backup when things weren't going well in her relationship. Karen didn't take it well. She became really upset, accusing me of not being supportive and of not understanding her situation. She said that I was judging her, and that I didn't know what it was like to be in a complicated relationship. She started crying, but I stood my ground. I told her that I was sorry she was going through a tough time, but I couldn't let her take advantage of my hospitality while she was lying to me. She left the next morning, and we haven't spoken much since. I've heard from mutual friends that Karen is still seeing James, and that things are going well for them. I don't know if they're really back together or if it's just another phase, but I feel like I was right to stand up for myself. Since then, my friends have been divided. Some think I did the right thing by standing my ground, while others think I should have been more understanding and patient with her. My family also thinks I could have been more forgiving. I've been wondering if I was too harsh or if I should have given her more space to sort things out. So, AITA for not letting my best friend stay at my place after she lied to me about her relationship. AITA for refusing to let my brother move back in after he kicked me out of his apartment. I, 26M, have a younger brother, Adam, 23M. We've always had a pretty close relationship growing up, but things got complicated when we both moved to different cities for college. I stayed in the city where I went to school and eventually found a decent job, while Adam decided to move to another city after finishing his degree. We stayed in touch, but we didn't hang out as much, and our relationship started to shift a bit as we both got older. A year ago, Adam reached out to me and told me he was looking for a new place to live in my city. His job had moved him here temporarily, and he wanted to be closer to work. At the time, I had a decent-sized apartment and was living alone, so I offered to let him stay with me for a while until he found something more permanent. I told him he could stay as long as he needed. No pressure. Things started off fine, but over the course of the next few months, we began to run into issues. Adam, despite being my brother, started acting in ways that I found difficult to deal with. First off, he didn't contribute much to household expenses. I understand that when you first move into a new place, it can be hard to get settled, and I wasn't expecting him to pay for everything right away. But after a few months, I started noticing that he was buying takeout almost every night, spending money on gadgets, and going out with friends regularly, but he wasn't chipping in for rent, utilities, or groceries. I tried to bring it up in a casual way at first. I told him, "Hey, I don't mind you staying here, but I'd appreciate it if you could help out with rent and groceries." His response was that he was still adjusting to his new job and hadn't budgeted for extra expenses. I thought that was fair, but I still felt like he could at least try to pitch in a bit. We had a few more conversations along those lines, but it never really changed. The bigger issue, though, was that Adam's personality started to change when he moved in. He became increasingly messy and inconsiderate. I worked from home, so I was around the apartment a lot, and I found myself cleaning up after him constantly. His dirty laundry would pile up in the bathroom. He'd leave empty food containers all over the living room, and I'd come home to find dishes piled in the sink. I asked him to be more mindful of cleaning up after himself, but it didn't seem to make a difference. He'd get defensive, telling me that it wasn't a big deal or that I was overreacting. I tried to be patient for a while because I didn't want to cause tension. He was family, and I didn't want to make things awkward between us. But as time went on, the situation got worse. I would ask him to do basic things like take out the trash or clean up the kitchen, and he would either forget or just ignore me. The final straw came when I was out of town for a work conference for a few days. When I came back, I found that Adam had thrown a party in my apartment while I was gone, without telling me or asking for permission. My stuff was scattered around, there were empty beer cans everywhere, and the place smelled like smoke. I was furious. I confronted him about it, and he just shrugged it off, saying, "It's just a party. Everyone does it." I told him that he couldn't keep doing this, and that if he didn't respect my boundaries, he couldn't stay here anymore. Adam got defensive and said that I was being controlling and that he needed a place to let loose. I told him that I was fine with him having friends over, but this wasn't the way to go about it. After that, I decided that enough was enough. I told Adam that he had to find a new place to live and move out. Adam was upset, obviously. He argued with me for hours, telling me I was being unreasonable and that I was kicking him out just when he was starting to get comfortable. He said that I had promised him he could stay as long as he needed, and that I was breaking that promise. I explained that I wasn't kicking him out because I didn't care about him, but because his behavior was making it impossible for me to live in my own home. After a heated discussion, he reluctantly agreed to move out and find a new place. A few months passed, and things were relatively calm. Adam got his own apartment, and I didn't hear much from him except for the occasional text or check-in. We both kind of distanced ourselves for a while, but I thought we were both okay with it. That was until about 2 weeks ago when Adam reached out again. He told me that his lease was ending soon, and he had nowhere to go. His new job had him working long hours, and he was struggling to find a new place on short notice. He asked if he could stay with me again, temporarily, while he looked for a new apartment. Now, this is where I'm feeling conflicted. Part of me wants to help him because he's my brother, and I know that sometimes life throws curveballs. But another part of me remembers how he treated me when he was living with me before. He took advantage of my hospitality, was disrespectful of my space, and didn't follow through on his promises to contribute to household chores or expenses. Honestly, I don't think I could go through that again. I told him that I didn't feel comfortable letting him move back in. I explained that while I understood he was in a tough spot, I needed to prioritize my own well-being and living situation. I reminded him of the problems we had last time and said that I just couldn't have him treating my place like a free hotel again. He got really upset, accusing me of being selfish and not being there for him when he needed me the most. He also said that I was holding a grudge over things that happened months ago and that he had changed. I felt guilty because I know he's in a tough position, but I also feel like I've already been more than generous with him in the past. I'm just not sure I can risk having him back in my space, especially when he hasn't shown that he can respect my boundaries. My parents have weighed in, telling me that I should just let him stay for a short time while he gets back on his feet. They say that families should help each other out, especially in tough situations, and that I'm being too harsh. A few of my friends also think I should let him stay, reminding me that I would want help if I were in his position. So, AITA for refusing to let my brother move back in after he kicked me out of his apartment? AITA for confronting my mom about her favoritism towards my brother? I, 29F, have always had a complicated relationship with my mom, 55F, and my brother, 26M. Growing up, it was pretty clear that my brother was the golden child. He could do no wrong in my mom's eyes, while I was often overlooked, criticized, or just ignored. At first, I chalked it up to him being younger, but as we got older, the disparity didn't really fade, and I began to feel like I was just being held to a different standard. My brother has always been the charming, funny one. He's naturally likable and has a way of getting people to like him, even when he messes up. I'll admit that I've always been a bit more reserved and introverted. I've never been particularly good at small talk or keeping things light, and I've always preferred to stay out of the limelight. But growing up, it felt like my mom always showered him with praise, while I was left to figure things out on my own. If he got a B on a test, my mom would make a big deal out of it, telling him how proud she was of him for trying hard. When I would bring home a B, it was met with a lecture about how I could do better. It didn't matter if I was putting in the same amount of effort as him. The expectation was that I should be better. As we got older, the favoritism didn't stop. My brother went off to college and switched majors a few times before finally graduating. During that time, he was living at home on and off, and my mom would constantly cover for him, paying for his bills, buying him things he needed, and making excuses for why he wasn't working full-time or being more responsible. Meanwhile, I was working part-time through college to pay for my own tuition, and I wasn't getting the same support. It wasn't that I wanted my mom to give me money or make things easier for me, but it felt like she was always bending over backward for him and never did the same for me. The breaking point came a few months ago when I was dealing with a personal crisis. My boyfriend and I had broken up after a long relationship, and I was feeling devastated. I had been living in an apartment by myself, and I couldn't afford to keep up with rent after the breakup. I called my mom, asking if she could help me out by letting me move back in for a few months while I got back on my feet. She hesitated at first, but eventually said that she would think about it. A few days later, I got a text from her saying that she discussed it with your brother, and they both agreed that it might not be the best idea. I was surprised, especially considering I was going through a hard time, and I hadn't really asked for much help before. I asked her why, and she said that it might cause tension in the house, and that my brother had expressed concerns about my attitude since I was upset about my breakup. That's when I realized that my brother had been influencing everything, and it felt like I was constantly being judged for things I didn't even know I was being judged for. When I pressed her more, she said that she didn't want to deal with the drama and that it might cause conflict between me and my brother, who was already stressed out about his own life. I was hurt, and I told her I was disappointed in her response. I reminded her that she had let my brother stay at home numerous times and that he had never been told no, no matter how many mistakes he'd made. She told me I was being unfair, that my brother had been through a lot, and that he was still trying to figure things out. I just couldn't believe that she was giving him a pass for everything while I was being shut down when I needed help the most. For the next few weeks, I stayed quiet. I avoided calling my mom or texting her. I was still reeling from how she had let me down, and I needed some space. My brother, of course, noticed that things were tense, and he reached out to me to ask if everything was okay. I didn't go into specifics, but I told him that I wasn't happy with how things were being handled between me and Mom, especially when it came to the favoritism. He brushed it off and told me that I was being too sensitive. He said I should just let it go, but it really bothered me that he wasn't even trying to understand where I was coming from. After a few weeks, I decided that I needed to have a conversation with my mom about how I felt. I couldn't just let it fester anymore, and I wanted her to know that I wasn't going to be silent about it. I invited her to meet me for coffee, and we sat down together. I told her how I felt about the favoritism, how it had affected me growing up, and how I was still feeling like I was being treated differently, even as an adult. I explained that I didn't want my brother to be punished or anything, but I wanted her to realize that I had needs too, and that it wasn't fair to always put him first. My mom became defensive. She said that she didn't mean to make me feel that way, and that she loved us both equally. She said that she had tried her best, and that my brother had just needed more attention and support. I told her that it wasn't about needing attention, but about fairness. I pointed out that I had always been expected to take care of myself while my brother got to make mistakes and still be babied. It wasn't just about money or living situations, but the emotional support too. It felt like everything was about him, and I was just supposed to be fine. She started to cry and told me that I was breaking her heart, saying that she never meant to hurt me. But then, she went right back to defending my brother. She said that he had been through a lot, and that she couldn't just kick him out or make him figure things out. I left the conversation feeling like nothing had changed. She was still blind to the way she treated us differently, and it was clear that my brother would always be the priority. Now, I'm stuck in this awkward situation. I don't know how to move forward with my mom. I'm still hurt, and I don't think I'm being unreasonable by wanting some level of fairness. But I also don't want to cause a permanent rift in the family. My brother is still acting like nothing happened, and my mom is still playing the "I love you both equally" card, even though her actions clearly show otherwise. So, AITA for confronting my mom about the favoritism, or am I overreacting and making things more difficult than they need to be? AITA for not allowing my brother to move in with me after he lost his job. So I, 34F, have a bit of a situation that has caused some tension between me and my family, and I'm genuinely unsure if I'm in the wrong here. Here's the background. I have an older brother, 38M, and we've always had a somewhat rocky relationship. We're not estranged, but we're not super close either. Growing up, he was always the rebellious one, constantly getting into trouble, not taking responsibility, and causing drama at family gatherings. I was the responsible, perfect child who kept my head down, got good grades, and always tried to avoid conflict. We've never really seen eye to eye on anything, and as adults, we mostly keep our distance. Recently, my brother lost his job. He works in tech, and while I know the industry can be volatile, I wasn't all that surprised when he called me to tell me the news. To be honest, he had been making questionable career choices for years. He didn't have a strong work ethic, didn't make connections, and seemed to float between companies, never sticking around long enough to build anything substantial. Despite his lack of focus, he always assumed that things would work out for him, and frankly, it kind of felt like he expected everyone else to pick up the slack when they didn't. About a month ago, he reached out to me, asking if he could move in with me temporarily while he looked for a new job. I've always had a small, one-bedroom apartment, but it's in a great neighborhood, and I really enjoy the peace and quiet it offers. I told him that I'd have to think about it and let him know. I was initially hesitant for a few reasons. First, I knew that he wouldn't just be a temporary guest. He'd likely be there for months, maybe even longer. Second, our relationship had always been a bit strained, and I didn't think living together would improve things. He's someone who doesn't really respect boundaries or rules, and I didn't want to end up resenting him. Finally, there's the fact that I've worked really hard for my space. It's my sanctuary, and I didn't feel ready to disrupt that. A few days later, my brother texted me again, saying that he was having trouble finding a place to stay and that he was starting to feel desperate. He promised he'd pitch in for rent and help with groceries, and he even said he'd be out as soon as he found a job. I thought about it for a few days, discussed it with a couple of close friends, and ultimately decided I didn't feel comfortable letting him stay with me. I replied, explaining that while I understood he was going through a tough time, I wasn't in a position to offer him a place to stay. I told him I valued my privacy and needed to keep my space, especially with everything going on in my life. To say he didn't take it well would be an understatement. He sent me a long message, accusing me of being selfish and unsupportive. He reminded me that we're family and that family should help each other, especially in times of need. He said that I should be willing to make a sacrifice for him, considering he's had my back in the past, which honestly is a bit of a stretch. He's never really been there for me in any meaningful way. He even told me that he was disappointed in me for not being the kind of sister who would open her door to family in need. After receiving that message, I felt a mix of guilt and frustration. I'm not a cold person. I genuinely care about my brother's well-being. But at the same time, I had to remind myself that I've worked hard to build a life that's stable, peaceful, and free of drama. Letting my brother move in would mean that I'd be taking on a responsibility I wasn't prepared for, and I wasn't sure that he was actually going to take the situation seriously. From past experience, I knew he had a tendency to be complacent and expect things to just work out for him without putting in the necessary effort. A few days passed, and then he reached out again. This time, he said that he had nowhere else to go and that he was struggling emotionally. He asked if I could just let him stay for a couple of weeks to give him time to get back on his feet. He said he understood that I didn't want to help him out permanently, but he begged me to reconsider for just a little while. I again declined, but this time, I told him that I hoped he would find another solution. I suggested that he look into staying with a friend or possibly a temporary rental, but I stuck with my decision that he couldn't move in with me. That's when things escalated. My parents got involved. They called me and said that I needed to be more understanding, that it wasn't easy for my brother, and that I should help him out because he has no one else. I told them that I understood his situation, but I simply didn't feel comfortable opening my home to him, given the history we have. My mom, in particular, was upset and said that I was being too harsh, that I should grow up and help my family when they need it. My dad didn't say much, but I could tell he agreed with my mom. Now, my brother has started posting passive-aggressive comments on social media, essentially calling me a bad sister and publicly airing his grievances. It's embarrassing, and honestly, it's making me question my decision. Part of me wants to reach out and apologize just to make the peace, but I also feel like I've made the right choice. I know that if I let him move in, I'd end up resenting him, and it would strain our already fragile relationship even more. But I also know that my family sees me as the villain in this situation, and it's frustrating. So, AITA for refusing to let my brother move in with me after he lost his job, even though he's asking for my help? Am I being too harsh? Or am I justified in wanting to maintain my boundaries? AITA for not attending my sister's baby shower after she criticized my decision to remain child-free. I 30F. Have a younger sister, Emily 26F, and we've always had a close relationship growing up. We've been through a lot together, from family issues to personal milestones. But lately, things have become strained between us, especially after Emily found out that I had made the decision to be child-free. It all started a couple of years ago when I met with Emily and some family members for lunch. During that time, Emily had recently gotten engaged, and she was in full-on wedding planning mode. Naturally, the conversation turned to family, and she started talking about her future plans for kids. I didn't think much of it at first, but I eventually shared with her that I had decided not to have children. This wasn't a decision I made lightly. I've always known I wasn't interested in having kids, and I felt that this was the right choice for me. I wasn't trying to make a statement. I just wanted her to know where I stood as we were having a casual conversation about life choices. Her reaction was not what I expected. Emily immediately became quiet, and when I asked her what was wrong, she said, "I don't understand how anyone could choose not to have kids. I mean, it's not like you're getting any younger." At first, I brushed off her comment. We've always had different perspectives on a lot of things, and I knew she was excited about starting a family. But Emily kept pushing the issue. She kept asking why I didn't want kids, as if it were a personal attack on her life choices. I tried to explain that it was simply my decision, and I didn't feel the need to justify it. I didn't criticize her for wanting a family, and I didn't expect her to criticize me for not wanting one. But she didn't seem to understand and kept telling me that it was a selfish decision and that I'd regret it when I was older. Her words stung, and I could tell that the conversation was creating a rift between us. I ended up just changing the subject, but Emily didn't let it go. Over the following months, she made several passive-aggressive comments about my decision. She would say things like, "I can't imagine a life without kids," or "It's sad that you won't experience the joy of being a parent." Every time, I'd politely change the subject or distance myself from the conversation. It was clear she wasn't respecting my choice, and I started to feel hurt by her repeated comments. Things got even worse when Emily found out I wasn't planning on attending her baby shower. She'd been asking me for months to come, and at first I didn't mind. But the closer the date got, the more I realized that I wasn't comfortable attending. It wasn't that I didn't want to celebrate her or support her as she was about to become a mother. I love Emily, and I'm happy for her, but I didn't feel like it was the right environment for me. The baby shower was going to be full of people who had kids or were planning on having kids, and I knew I'd be surrounded by comments about motherhood and parenting. I also didn't want to deal with the possibility of her or anyone else questioning my decision not to have children. I just didn't want to be in a situation where I felt like an outsider or where I might be made to feel bad about my choice. So, I decided to politely decline the invitation. I called Emily and told her that I appreciated the invite, but I didn't feel comfortable attending the baby shower. I explained that it wasn't because I didn't support her or was unhappy for her, but because the event just wasn't something I felt I'd enjoy or fit into. I told her I'd love to celebrate with her in other ways, like after the baby arrived, or in a smaller setting where I wouldn't feel out of place. Emily didn't take it well. She was immediately upset and accused me of ruining her special moment. She said that I was being selfish again, and that I was making her feel like her happiness wasn't important to me. She also told me that it hurt her that I didn't want to be there for her during such an important time in her life. I tried to explain that my decision wasn't about her, but about my own comfort and mental well-being. However, she wouldn't listen. She told me that if I didn't attend her baby shower, it would be a clear sign that I didn't care about her or her family. She went on to say that if I couldn't support her during this, then maybe I didn't deserve to be a part of her life anymore. The guilt started to hit me after that conversation. I didn't want to hurt Emily, and I certainly didn't want her to feel like I was abandoning her. I tried to apologize for upsetting her and offered to find another way to celebrate, but she wasn't having it. She told me that I had made my decision, and now I had to live with the consequences. After that conversation, we barely spoke for weeks. She stopped responding to my texts and only replied when she needed something. Every time we did talk, it felt like there was an underlying tension, and I could tell she was still holding a grudge. A few weeks ago, Emily sent me a message that made me feel like things were finally starting to cool off. She told me that she understood why I didn't want to come to the shower, but that it still hurt. She also said she would be disappointed if I didn't want to be involved in her life after the baby was born, but she'd respect my decision. I didn't know how to respond. Part of me wanted to tell her that I wasn't rejecting her or her baby, but I was also still hurt by how she'd treated me over the past few months. She made it seem like my decision not to have kids was some sort of betrayal. Now, I feel completely torn. I don't want to lose my sister, but I also don't want to be made to feel guilty for the personal decision I've made about my life. I understand that having a baby is a huge deal and that it's a special moment for her, but I don't think I should have to sacrifice my boundaries for her comfort. I love her, and I want to be there for her in the ways I can, but I also need her to understand that my child-free choice isn't a reflection of my feelings for her or her family. It's just who I am. So, AITA for not attending my sister's baby shower after she criticized my decision to remain child-free. Hey friends, if you enjoy this content, don't forget to like the video and share your thoughts in the comments. We really want to know what you like and what could be improved. What do you think of the video? Are there any topics you'd like to see in future videos? Your feedback really helps us get better. Thanks for being with us. AITA for refusing to let my friend bring her partner to my vacation house, even though they've been together for 2 years. I, 29F, have a close-knit group of friends that I've known since college. We're all pretty tight, and we make an effort to hang out whenever we can, even though we've all been busy with work, relationships, and life in general. One of my friends, Laura, 28F, and I have been particularly close. We were roommates during our senior year, and we've shared a lot of memories and experiences together. While we all have our individual lives now, we still try to do a big trip together every year to catch up and unwind. This year, I offered up my vacation house in the mountains as the place for our annual getaway. It's a small but cozy cabin that my family owns, and I've been going there for years to relax and get away from the chaos of city life. The house is tucked away in a remote area, and while it's beautiful, it's not the most luxurious spot. It's the kind of place where we all pitch in to keep it running, but it's perfect for a low-key weekend of hiking, board games, and bonfires. When I offered the place to the group, I made it clear that I was inviting my closest friends. This includes Laura, and she immediately responded with excitement, saying she'd love to come. However, shortly after, she dropped a bombshell. She wanted to bring her boyfriend, Nick, 31M, along. Laura and Nick have been together for about 2 years now, and while I get that relationships evolve, I felt uncomfortable with the idea of him coming along. I've met Nick a few times. He's a nice guy, but he and I have never really clicked. We've had some awkward interactions in the past, and I've always felt like there was something off about him. He's very reserved, doesn't seem to mesh well with the rest of our group, and overall, I didn't think he'd be a good fit for a trip where we all hang out and bond. To be completely honest, I also wasn't thrilled about the idea of him invading what has always been a fun, low-stress time for me and my friends. So, I told Laura that I was uncomfortable with the idea of Nick joining us, and that the trip was intended for our friend group, not for people's significant others. I made it clear that I didn't have anything personal against Nick, but that I valued the dynamic of our group and the fact that we've always had these trips to ourselves. I also mentioned that I was trying to keep the trip small and intimate, and I didn't want the house to feel crowded. I explained that if it were just the girls, we could all have a better time catching up and relaxing. Laura wasn't happy. She told me that I was being unfair and that I was excluding Nick just because I wasn't close with him. She said that Nick had been a huge support for her, especially during some tough times, and that it wasn't fair that I didn't want him to be part of a special trip for her. She also mentioned that it felt like I was trying to create an us versus them situation, which I honestly hadn't thought of at the time. After our conversation, I felt conflicted. I didn't want to hurt Laura, but I also didn't feel comfortable bending on this. This trip was meant to be an escape, and I really wanted it to be a time where we could all unwind without the pressure of having someone new in the mix. I talked it over with a few other friends in the group, and they were all on the same page. They agreed that the trip had always been just for our close-knit group, and adding someone else, especially a partner who wasn't familiar with our dynamic, could change the vibe of the weekend. I reached back out to Laura and told her that I understood where she was coming from, but that I wasn't going to change my mind. I reiterated that it was nothing personal against Nick, but I just didn't want the dynamic to shift. She didn't take it well. She sent me a long message saying that I was being selfish and that she felt like I was making her choose between her relationship and her friendship with me. She even went so far as to say that I was being controlling and that I was trying to dictate who she could or couldn't spend time with. I felt terrible reading her message. I didn't want her to feel like she was being put in a difficult position, but I also didn't think I was in the wrong for wanting to maintain the same vibe we'd always had on these trips. I understand that relationships change and people grow, but I still didn't feel comfortable with the idea of Nick coming along. A few days passed, and Laura and I didn't talk much. Then she reached out to me again and said that if I was really going to be this adamant about it, she would rather not come at all than be forced to choose between me and Nick. She told me that if I couldn't accept her relationship, then maybe I wasn't as good of a friend as I thought I was. That really stung, and I tried to explain again that it wasn't about rejecting her relationship, but more about wanting the trip to stay the way it always had been. I haven't heard from her since, and now I'm wondering if I was too harsh. It feels like I've lost a good friend over this. I understand that she's in a serious relationship, and I don't want to make her feel like I'm not supporting her, but at the same time, I don't think I'm wrong for wanting to preserve the dynamic of the trip and the time we've always spent as a group. So, AITA for refusing to let my friend bring her partner to my vacation house, even though they've been together for 2 years. AITA for calling out my best friend for not supporting me during a family emergency because she was too busy. I, 28F, have a best friend, Rachel, 29F, who I've known since we were in high school. We've been through a lot together, and over the years, we've formed what I thought was an unshakable bond. We're both very independent people, but we always made sure to support each other when it really counted. I've always considered Rachel to be someone I could rely on, until recently, when a family emergency made me question everything. A few weeks ago, my dad, 56M, was hospitalized. He had a stroke out of nowhere. It was terrifying. He's always been healthy and active, so this came as a total shock. I had to drop everything and rush to the hospital to be with him. It was a chaotic and emotional time, and I was in a complete panic. My dad's condition was serious, and my mom, 52F, was beside herself. I immediately reached out to Rachel because I was feeling completely overwhelmed, and I knew she'd be there for me. I called her, and she picked up right away. I told her what happened, and she was very sympathetic at first, telling me she was so sorry and that she was there for me if I needed anything. What happened next, though, left me feeling completely alone. Rachel told me that she had a big work project coming up and that she was too busy to come with me to the hospital or to help out. She said she'd be available for a phone call if I needed someone to talk to, but that was basically it. I told her I appreciated her offer, but I felt completely let down. I wasn't asking her to drop everything for me, but I thought she'd at least offer more concrete support, like coming to the hospital to keep me company or helping me figure out logistics while I was juggling everything. I didn't press the issue, though, and just thanked her for being there, so I thought. The next few days were a blur of hospital visits, keeping my mom company, dealing with medical updates, and trying to coordinate family logistics. The whole time, Rachel barely checked in. She sent a text or two, but it was clear she was preoccupied with her work and other things in her life. On the third day, I sent her a message saying I was really struggling and feeling emotionally drained. She replied with a short message saying, "I get it, but I'm really swamped. I'll check in later." I didn't know how to feel. I tried to not make it a big deal, but inside I was hurt. My best friend, someone I thought I could count on in a crisis, seemed like she was more concerned about her job than about me. It felt like she didn't care enough to step up, even though I needed her. After a few more days of feeling like I was navigating this emergency on my own, I broke down a bit. I called Rachel again and told her how I felt. I told her that I needed her more than just over text or a quick phone call, that I was going through one of the hardest times in my life, and I thought she would be there for me. I told her that her lack of support was making me feel isolated and alone. She said she understood, but she didn't seem to get the gravity of the situation. She told me, "I'm just really busy, and you know I'd be there if I could. But work is crazy right now, and I can't just drop everything. You're strong, and you'll get through this." That's when I really started to feel frustrated. It felt dismissive. She didn't acknowledge how hard it was for me to be in a situation where my dad's health was uncertain, where I was trying to juggle being there for my mom while also taking care of myself. She wasn't offering me real help, just platitudes, and it felt like she was brushing my feelings aside. A few days later, things got even worse. My dad's condition worsened, and we were given some really scary news. The doctors told us that it was likely he wouldn't recover fully, and it was a waiting game to see if he'd make it through. I was beside myself. I immediately called Rachel to talk. This time, I was desperate for some emotional support, and I really needed someone who could help me process everything. She picked up the phone, and I told her about my dad's prognosis, but she didn't seem as upset as I was expecting. She didn't offer words of comfort or try to console me. She said, "Wow, that's really awful. But I still have this massive work deadline. I can't really talk right now. I'll check in with you later." Okay. That was the final straw. I hung up the phone feeling crushed. Not only did she seem emotionally detached, but she also seemed completely disinterested in my pain. I knew she was busy with work, but it was clear to me that she was choosing her career over supporting her best friend during a major family crisis. I tried to brush it off, but the more I thought about it, the more hurt I felt. Eventually, I decided I needed to confront her about it. A week later, after things had calmed down a bit with my dad, I texted Rachel, asking if we could talk. We made plans to meet up for coffee, and when we sat down, I laid it all out. I told her how I felt completely abandoned by her during one of the most difficult times of my life. I told her that it hurt me that she seemed to care more about her job than about me, and that I felt like she was brushing off my feelings as though they didn't matter. I told her that I needed emotional support, not just empty words, and it felt like she didn't even try to be there for me. She was quiet for a long time before she responded. She apologized and said that she didn't realize how much her actions were affecting me. She explained that her job had been incredibly demanding, and she'd been under a lot of stress. She also said that she didn't know how to handle the situation, and that she felt awkward about the whole thing. She said that she didn't know what I needed from her, and she thought sending text messages or calling occasionally was the best she could do. I wanted to believe her, but it was hard. She had let me down when I needed her the most, and I wasn't sure how to move forward. I told her that I appreciated her apology, but that I still felt deeply hurt by how she handled the situation. I told her that I needed her to understand that this wasn't just about work or her being busy. It was about me needing her as a friend, and it felt like she wasn't making any effort to prioritize our friendship when it really mattered. After that conversation, things between us felt strained. I don't know if I'll ever be able to fully get past how she handled it. I've been distancing myself from her since then because I'm not sure if I can trust her to support me during difficult times. I've had other friends reach out and be there for me when I needed it, and it's made me realize that sometimes people's actions speak louder than their words. So, AITA for confronting Rachel about her lack of support during my family emergency. I feel like I might be holding on to my hurt too much, but at the same time, I think a friend should show up when things are tough. Am I being too harsh, or is this something I'm right to be upset about? AITA for confronting my roommate after she made a mess of our shared space and refused to clean up. I, 25F, have a roommate, Sarah, 24F, who I've been living with for about a year. We met through a mutual friend, and when we both found ourselves looking for places to rent in the same city, it made sense to move in together. Overall, our living situation has been pretty good, but there have been a few issues that have started to build up, and it's reached a breaking point. We share a 2-bedroom apartment, and we split rent and utilities evenly. I'm a pretty tidy person, and I make an effort to keep the apartment clean and organized. I don't mind doing my fair share of cleaning, but I'm not the type of person who will clean up after someone else every single time. Sarah, on the other hand, has always been a little more laid back when it comes to cleanliness. At first, I didn't think it was a huge problem, because she'd clean up her messes eventually. But over the last few months, things have gotten worse. Sarah tends to leave her stuff all over the place: clothes, dirty dishes, food wrappers, and sometimes even just random items that don't really belong in the common areas. I've asked her on a few occasions to be more mindful of the shared spaces, especially the kitchen and living room. For the most part, she'll say she'll do better, but things always end up back the way they were. I'd end up cleaning up after her, and it started to feel really frustrating. A couple of weeks ago, I came home after a long day at work and walked into the kitchen to find it in complete chaos. There were dirty dishes piled up in the sink, crumbs all over the counter, and a half-finished meal that had been sitting out for hours. There was also food splattered on the microwave and oven. I couldn't even make myself a simple meal without having to spend at least 30 minutes cleaning up. And this wasn't the first time. It had been happening on a regular basis. I decided I'd had enough. I knew I couldn't keep cleaning up after her, and I needed to confront her about it. So, I waited until she was home that evening, and we had a sit-down conversation in the living room. I started by calmly explaining how I was feeling. I told her that I was really frustrated with the state of the apartment and how I felt like I was doing most of the cleaning while she wasn't taking responsibility for her part. I explained that I didn't mind cleaning up occasionally, but it was getting to the point where I was spending most of my free time tidying up after her. I asked her if she could please start pulling her weight and be more considerate about the shared spaces. Instead of acknowledging my feelings or apologizing, she immediately became defensive. She told me that I was being dramatic and that I shouldn't expect her to clean up after herself all the time. She said that she had other priorities and that sometimes she just didn't have the energy to clean. She also said that it was too much pressure for me to expect her to keep the apartment spotless when we were both busy. While I understand that we all have busy lives, I still felt like it wasn't unreasonable to ask her to clean up her messes when it was affecting both of us. I calmly explained that I wasn't expecting her to keep the apartment immaculate, but that a basic level of cleanliness was necessary, especially when it was making the space uncomfortable for me. I also pointed out that it wasn't just an occasional slip-up. It was becoming a regular pattern. I suggested that we come up with some kind of plan where we could split the cleaning responsibilities in a way that felt fair to both of us. She didn't take well to this suggestion. She started getting more agitated and said, "I don't have time for a cleaning schedule, and I'm not going to spend my whole weekend scrubbing the floors. I'm doing the best I can, but if you want everything to be perfect, maybe you should hire a cleaner." I was taken aback by her response. First of all, I never asked for perfection. I just wanted the apartment to be in a decent state. Secondly, the idea of hiring a cleaner didn't sit right with me. We were both perfectly capable of cleaning up after ourselves, and I didn't think it was fair for me to pay for a cleaner when it was a shared responsibility. After that, the conversation went downhill quickly. Sarah started accusing me of being too uptight and said that I was making mountains out of molehills. She said I was acting like I was the only one who did any work around the apartment and that I was blowing things out of proportion. At that point, I felt like nothing I said was getting through to her, and I was just trying to get her to understand my perspective. I ended the conversation by telling her that I couldn't continue living like this and that we needed to find a solution or else I'd have to look for a new living situation. The next day, I came home to find that the apartment had been tidied up. The kitchen was cleaner than it had been in a while, and some of the clutter in the living room had been picked up. I appreciated the effort, but it didn't erase the fact that we hadn't resolved the underlying issue. I still didn't feel like she fully understood my point of view, and I wasn't sure if this was just a temporary fix or if things would go back to normal in a few weeks. Since then, there's been some tension in the apartment. Sarah hasn't apologized, and it's clear that she's still not thrilled with the fact that I confronted her. I don't want to make things awkward, but I also don't want to keep living in a space that feels constantly messy and uncomfortable. I'm now at a crossroads. I don't want to escalate things further, but I also can't keep pretending that everything is okay when it's clearly affecting me. So, AITA for confronting my roommate about her mess and asking her to take responsibility for cleaning up, even though she's been defensive about it. AITA for not wanting to invite my stepmother to my wedding after she's consistently disrespected my mother. I, 28F, am getting married in a few months, and I'm currently in the process of finalizing the guest list. Everything has been going smoothly. Well, mostly, except for one major issue that's causing some serious tension between me and my dad, 54M. This whole situation revolves around my stepmother, 52F, who has been in my life for about 15 years now. For some context, my parents divorced when I was 13. It was a pretty tough time for me. My mom, 49F, and dad's split wasn't amicable, and I witnessed a lot of arguing and fighting. My dad's relationship with my mom became pretty strained, and eventually, he started dating my stepmother. My mom didn't get along with her from the start, and honestly, neither did I. My stepmother has always been very opinionated, and while I respect that she's my dad's partner, I've always felt like she's overstepped her boundaries in a lot of ways. Growing up, I felt like my stepmother tried to insert herself into situations where she wasn't wanted, particularly when it came to things involving my mom. A few examples. When I was in high school, I had a major project due, and my dad asked my stepmother to help me with it without asking me first. I didn't want her involvement, and I felt like it was completely inappropriate for her to step in without consulting me. She ended up criticizing my work and making me feel incompetent, even though I had done all the work myself. Another incident was when I was 16 and had my first big breakup. I went to my dad's house to stay for a weekend to get away from everything, and my stepmother decided to comfort me by lecturing me about getting over it and how relationships weren't that big of a deal. That hurt, and it stuck with me for a long time. Over the years, I've tried to maintain a relationship with my dad while keeping my distance from her. I've always been civil at family gatherings and holidays, but I've never felt like she was my second mom or anything close. We're cordial, but there's always been an underlying tension. My mom, of course, has always been supportive of me in these feelings and has been pretty clear about how she feels about my dad's remarriage. She's never been openly hostile to my stepmother, but she's never gone out of her way to be friendly either. And I can't blame her, considering how my stepmother has treated her over the years. My mom has always said that my dad's choices were his to make, but she made it clear she wasn't going to pretend everything was fine. When I got engaged, I was excited but also overwhelmed with the thought of balancing both families. My fiancé, 30M, and I decided to have a relatively small wedding, close family and friends only. My mom and dad both were obviously on the guest list, and I assumed my stepmother would be as well, out of respect for my dad. However, as I started to finalize the list, I found myself dreading the idea of having her there. The thought of her sitting at the same table as my mom made me anxious, and I didn't feel like I could enjoy my day if I was worried about their interactions. I started talking to my fiancé about it, and he encouraged me to do what made me feel comfortable, which was incredibly supportive. After some back and forth, I decided to not invite my stepmother. I know this might sound harsh, but I feel like she's never been a supportive or positive presence in my life. The last straw for me was a conversation we had last year. I was talking to my dad on the phone, and my stepmother overheard the conversation and rudely interrupted, saying that my mom wasn't welcome at any family events anymore because of how disrespectful she's been over the years. My dad was silent while she said this, and I was left feeling completely hurt by her words. She has no right to decide who is welcome in my life, especially when it comes to my own mother. I haven't spoken to her about this directly, but I decided that I couldn't, in good conscience, invite her to my wedding after everything. I've been trying to figure out how to approach this with my dad. I know he's going to be hurt and upset that his wife won't be there, but at the same time, I feel like I shouldn't have to sacrifice my comfort for a woman who has repeatedly disrespected my mother and me over the years. I don't want to cause drama or tension, but I also want my wedding to be a joyful occasion without worrying about my stepmother's comments or behavior. A few days ago, I finally gathered the courage to talk to my dad. I told him that I had decided not to invite my stepmother, and I explained why. I said that I wanted the day to be about celebrating my relationship with my fiancé, and I didn't want to feel uncomfortable or forced into awkward situations. My dad immediately became defensive. He said that it wasn't fair for me to exclude her, especially since she's been a part of the family for so long. He said that I was being childish and that it was hurtful to him that I would make this decision. He also mentioned that it would cause a rift between us if I went through with it. I tried to explain my side of things, but he kept cutting me off, saying I was being unreasonable. Eventually, the conversation ended with him telling me that if my stepmother wasn't invited, he wouldn't come either. I was stunned. I knew my dad valued my stepmother, but I didn't expect him to threaten not attending my wedding. That hit me hard. I love my dad, and I've always wanted him to be a part of my special moments. But I also don't think it's fair to ask me to sacrifice my peace and happiness just to appease him or my stepmother. My fiancé thinks I'm in the right and that I shouldn't have to compromise, but the guilt is eating me up. I don't want to lose my dad, but I also don't want to invite someone who has been consistently disrespectful and hurtful towards me and my mother. Now, my family is divided. My mom is completely supportive of my decision and agrees with me that I don't owe my stepmother an invitation, but my dad has been cold with me ever since. I don't know what to do, Should I stand firm in my decision and risk losing my dad's presence at my wedding, or should I swallow my feelings and invite my stepmother for the sake of family harmony? So, AITA for not wanting to invite my stepmother to my wedding because of her past behavior and how it has impacted my relationship with my family. AITA for not letting my brother move into my apartment even though he's going through a tough time. I, 30M, have a younger brother, Kevin, 26M, who has always been a bit of a wild card. We've always had a decent relationship, but we've never been super close. Kevin has always had a more carefree attitude, and while I don't mind that he enjoys life and has a less structured approach to things, it's often led him into some situations that aren't ideal. A few months ago, Kevin found himself in a bit of a bind. He had been living with his girlfriend, Rachel, but they broke up in a dramatic fashion. He didn't go into too many details, but from what I gather, there was a lot of drama involved, and things ended badly. Rachel asked him to leave, and he didn't have anywhere else to go. His first instinct was to reach out to me for help. He called me and said he needed a place to stay temporarily until he got back on his feet. I'm not heartless. I knew he was in a tough spot, but I wasn't sure I was the best option for him. I've lived alone for several years, and I value my space and privacy. Plus, Kevin and I aren't exactly the best roommates. When we were younger, sharing a room was a constant struggle. He's messy, loud, and often doesn't respect boundaries. I told him that I wasn't sure it would work for him to stay with me, but I promised to think about it. After thinking it over for a couple of days, I called him back and told him that I could let him stay for a short while, but I'd need a clear timeline and certain boundaries to make it work. I laid out some rules. He needed to contribute to rent, keep his area of the apartment clean, and respect my privacy. I made it clear that this wasn't going to be an indefinite arrangement, and I needed him to have a plan to get back on his feet within a couple of months. I also said that if things became uncomfortable or didn't improve, I would need him to move out sooner. Kevin agreed, and everything seemed fine at first. He moved in a week later, and for the first few days, things were relatively smooth. He kept his area tidy, didn't cause too much of a disruption, and we even had a few good conversations. However, it didn't take long before things started to get tense. First off, Kevin was frequently loud, even when I asked him to keep the noise down. I work from home, and I'm often on calls or trying to focus on projects, so the constant interruptions were starting to get to me. He also kept bringing friends over, which wasn't something I'd agreed to. The noise was one issue, but the fact that he had friends coming in and out without asking me first felt like a huge violation of the boundaries I'd set. I don't mind having guests occasionally, but I didn't feel comfortable with random people in my space without any heads up. As time went on, things only got worse. Kevin started leaving his things around the apartment. Dirty dishes piling up in the kitchen, clothes all over the living room, and even some of his personal items scattered around the bathroom. He wasn't taking care of his side of the apartment like he'd promised, and it was starting to feel like he was just using my place as a free pass to be lazy and do whatever he wanted. When I asked him to clean up, he would make excuses or give me a half-hearted promise that he'd do it later, which never seemed to happen. At one point, I had to sit him down again. I told him that the living situation was no longer working for me. I reminded him of the boundaries we'd agreed upon, and how things had become stressful for me because of the noise, the mess, and the lack of respect for my space. I also told him that if he didn't take the situation seriously, I'd have to ask him to leave. Kevin got defensive and told me I was being too hard on him. He said that he had no other options and that he was just trying to survive after his breakup. While I understood that he was going through a tough time, I felt like he was using that as an excuse to be irresponsible. After that conversation, things didn't improve. In fact, they got worse. Kevin stopped contributing to rent, and when I asked him about it, he said he didn't have the money. I knew he wasn't struggling that much, and I told him that if he couldn't afford rent, he'd need to move out. That's when the argument escalated. Kevin accused me of being selfish, saying I was abandoning him when he needed me most. He told me that I was kicking him while he was down and that he didn't have anyone else to turn to. I tried to explain that this wasn't about abandoning him, but about maintaining the boundaries I'd set from the beginning. I told him that I was willing to help him, but that didn't mean I was willing to put my own life on hold. Eventually, I had to make a decision. I couldn't continue living with him under these circumstances. I gave him an ultimatum. Either he could start taking things seriously and contribute to the apartment, or he would have to find another place to stay. He got angry and started accusing me of not being a good brother, saying I was prioritizing my own comfort over his well-being. It was a tough conversation, but I stood firm. At this point, I started looking for ways to get him out. I didn't want to kick him to the curb, but I also couldn't live like this any longer. A couple of days later, he packed up his things and moved in with a friend. We haven't spoken much since then, and I feel a little guilty about how things went down. I know he's struggling, and I wanted to help, but I also feel like I need to protect my own mental health and well-being. Now, my family is upset with me. My parents have called me several times, saying that I should have been more understanding and that I should have done more to help Kevin. They think I was too harsh and that I should have let him stay longer while he sorted things out. I've tried to explain my side, but they just don't get it. So, AITA for not letting my brother move into my apartment after he couldn't follow basic boundaries and responsibilities, even though he's going through a tough time. AITA for refusing to give my sister a large sum of money after she made a huge financial mistake. I, 32M, have a younger sister, 28F, Emily, and our relationship has always been a bit complicated. Growing up, I was the responsible one, always looking out for my younger siblings, and Emily was the one who always seemed to get into trouble. She'd often act impulsively, whether it was buying expensive clothes with money she didn't have or making life decisions that seemed rash. It's not that I don't love her, but I've always felt like I had to take on a parental role when it came to making sure she didn't get herself into situations that could have long-term consequences. For context, I have a well-paying job in the tech industry, and I've worked hard to get to where I am. I've always been frugal and have been able to save a good amount over the years. Emily, on the other hand, has struggled financially for a while. She's worked various retail jobs and has never really had a clear career path. She's a free spirit, I guess you could say, and hasn't always been great at budgeting or saving money. It's always been a point of tension between us because while I love her, I've had to step in more than once when she made questionable financial decisions. About 6 months ago, Emily came to me in a panic, asking for a large sum of money, $20,000. She told me she had made a massive financial mistake and was in over her head. She had been working with a financial advisor who convinced her to invest in a series of stocks that were supposedly guaranteed to go up. She put almost all of her savings into them, thinking it would help her get ahead financially. Well, as you can probably guess, the stocks tanked and she lost everything. She was devastated, and now she was asking me for help to get out of debt. I'll admit, I was furious when she first told me. I couldn't believe that she had been so reckless with her money. I tried to stay calm, but I couldn't help but wonder how she could be so careless. The money she had invested wasn't just her savings. It was everything she had. It was a huge chunk of what she had worked for, and now it was gone. And on top of that, she still owed money to the bank and to the advisor she had hired, and she was facing a huge amount of debt. The financial situation she had put herself in was a mess, and it was clear she was overwhelmed. I told her I didn't think I could help her. It wasn't that I didn't care, but I had worked hard for my savings, and I wasn't going to give her $20,000 to bail her out of a situation she had created. I explained that I didn't want to enable her to continue making bad financial decisions. And if I just handed her the money, she would never learn how to manage her own finances properly. She was upset, and we argued for a while. She told me I was being selfish, and that family was supposed to help each other in times of need. She said she was embarrassed and humiliated, and this money was the only way she could get out of the hole she was in. I stuck to my decision, and eventually she stopped pushing for the full $20,000, but she kept asking for smaller amounts to help her with immediate expenses like rent and utilities. I told her I could lend her a smaller amount, about $5,000, but that I wouldn't give her any more money unless she committed to attending financial counseling and working on a plan to pay off her debts. I also told her I would only give her the money if she could show me a budget plan for the next 6 months and how she would use the money responsibly. She agreed to this arrangement, and I transferred the $5,000 to her account. But even then, things didn't improve. A couple of months later, she called me again, asking for more money, and I was frustrated. I asked her how she had used the first $5,000, and she admitted that she had only used part of it to cover rent and utilities. The rest had been spent on a few unforeseen expenses, like a weekend trip with friends and some emergency shopping. I couldn't believe it. After everything that had happened, she was still making these impulsive decisions. I felt like she wasn't taking her situation seriously, and I felt like I was being taken advantage of. At that point, I told her I wasn't giving her any more money. I reminded her that we had agreed she would go to financial counseling and put together a budget. I also suggested that she consider selling some of the things she didn't need or get a second job to pay off her debts. I was really frustrated, and I told her that if she didn't start taking responsibility for her own life, I couldn't continue to bail her out. She was upset, and we had a tense conversation where she accused me of not caring about her and being too harsh. This entire situation has caused a rift between us. She hasn't talked to me much since that conversation, and when she does, it's usually just to update me on her financial situation or to ask for more advice. She's still struggling financially, and she's asked a few other relatives for help, but I'm not sure they're giving her much more than advice either. The whole family seems to be disappointed with her, and my parents have even suggested that I should have been more supportive and helped her out more. I get that they're concerned about her, but I can't keep enabling her behavior. I'm afraid that if I give her the money, she'll never learn how to handle her finances, and I'll be stuck in a cycle where I'm constantly bailing her out. Now, I'm questioning if I did the right thing. I know she's my sister, and I care about her, but I don't want to enable her to make more bad decisions. She made a huge mistake, and it's going to take a lot of work to fix it. I don't think it's my job to rescue her every time she messes up, but my family seems to think I should have helped more. I feel like I've been firm in my decision, but I also feel guilty that she's struggling so much. I love her, but I don't think I should be the one to fix her problems. So, AITA for refusing to give my sister a large sum of money after she made a huge financial mistake. I want to help, but I don't want to make it worse. AITA for refusing to let my friend move in after she lost her job and her apartment. I, 29M, have a close-knit group of friends that I've known since college. We're all in our late 20s now, and while we've gone in different directions in life, we still make an effort to stay in touch and support each other. One of my closest friends is Natalie, 28F. We met in freshman year, and we've been through a lot together. I've always seen her as one of my ride-or-die friends, and we've had some great memories. However, recently things have become a bit more complicated. Natalie lost her job a few months ago due to some company-wide layoffs, and since then, she's been really struggling. She's been applying to dozens of places, but nothing has panned out. A few weeks ago, she called me in tears and told me she was also being forced to move out of her apartment. Apparently, her landlord had raised the rent significantly, and she couldn't afford to stay anymore. She said she had nowhere else to go and asked if she could move in with me temporarily until she got back on her feet. I genuinely felt bad for her, and my first instinct was to help. I know she's going through a tough time, and I can't imagine how stressful it must be to be unemployed and facing housing instability. I told her I'd think about it and get back to her. I've always been open to helping my friends in need, but I was also a little hesitant. I've always been someone who values my space, and the idea of sharing my apartment with someone, especially long-term, didn't sit well with me. I'm used to living alone and having complete control over my environment. I thought about it for a few days, weighing the pros and cons. My apartment is a one-bedroom, and while it's not tiny, it's not exactly spacious enough to have someone else living there for an extended period. I'd have to rearrange things, give up privacy, and essentially lose my personal space. Plus, I've heard from other friends who've let people move in temporarily, and many of them had issues with boundaries, cleanliness, and just the general stress of living with someone else. I know Natalie, and while she's a great friend, she's not always the most organized. She tends to be a bit messy and has a habit of leaving things around. She also has a lot of personal stuff that would take up space in the apartment. I was concerned about how this might affect my routine and mental well-being. After thinking it over, I called her back and told her that, while I cared about her and wanted to help, I didn't feel comfortable having her move in. I explained that my apartment is small, and I valued my personal space. I told her I didn't think it would be healthy for either of us to live together for an extended period, especially given the current circumstances. I also said that I was happy to help her in other ways, like helping her look for apartments, providing references, or even helping her with food if she needed it. But living together just didn't seem like a good idea for either of us. Natalie didn't take it well. She was really upset and told me she felt like I was abandoning her when she needed me most. She said she thought we were close enough that I would help her through this, and that it was hurtful that I couldn't offer her a place to stay. She also accused me of being selfish and said that I was only thinking about myself and my comfort instead of helping a friend in need. I felt really conflicted after that conversation. I understood that she was in a tough spot, and I wanted to be there for her, but I also didn't think I was being unreasonable in setting boundaries. I don't think it's wrong to want to preserve your own mental health and comfort, especially when it comes to something as significant as living arrangements. A few days later, I found out that Natalie had been telling other friends in our circle about my decision. Some of them were sympathetic, but others started to question why I wouldn't just let her stay for a few months. They said things like, "You have the space, it's just a temporary thing, and she's your friend. You should help her out." A few of them even said that they were disappointed in me for not stepping up. One friend even texted me, saying that if I was truly her friend, I'd find a way to make it work. That comment really stung. Since then, I've felt a lot of guilt. I keep second-guessing my decision, especially with the pressure from our friend group. I've always tried to be the kind of person who supports my friends, and now I feel like I'm the one being judged. At the same time, I still stand by my decision. I don't think it's healthy for me to sacrifice my comfort and boundaries just because someone else is going through a tough time. It's a fine line between helping a friend and compromising your own well-being. It's been a few weeks since that conversation, and Natalie hasn't reached out to me much. I've tried texting her a couple of times, but she hasn't responded in the same way she used to. I'm not sure if she's still upset with me, or if she's just focusing on getting her life together. Either way, I feel like our friendship is a little strained now, and I hate that it's come to this. I've been thinking a lot about whether I could have done more or handled it differently. I don't want to lose a friend over this, but I also know that I made the right decision for myself. At the end of the day, I can't be the person who sacrifices my own well-being just to keep someone else comfortable. So, AITA for refusing to let my friend move in with me after she lost her job and apartment, even though she's going through a tough time. AITA for telling my best friend she's no longer welcome in my home after she made a horrible comment about my child's disability. I, 30F, have a 5-year-old son, Lucas, who was diagnosed with autism when he was around 2. It's been a tough but rewarding journey so far, and we've learned a lot about how to support him and help him navigate the world. He's a sweet kid, he's highly sensitive, smart, and he loves trains. He has some difficulties with communication and socializing, but he's getting better every day with the help of therapy and our constant support. We're a very close-knit family, and we do our best to create an environment where Lucas feels loved, accepted, and safe. Now, I want to preface this by saying I have a best friend, Sarah, 29F, who I've known for over a decade. She's one of my closest friends, and up until recently, we had a really strong relationship. We used to hang out all the time, go to the movies, and share personal stuff. We've always been there for each other through thick and thin, and I've supported her through a lot of difficult times in her life. However, over the past year or so, I've noticed some things that have been bothering me about her behavior, particularly in relation to my son. For example, she'd make comments about how she didn't understand why Lucas acted a certain way or why he couldn't control himself in certain situations. While I get that people might not be familiar with autism and might ask questions out of curiosity, I always felt like the tone of her questions was more judgmental than anything else. I'd gently explain his behaviors and needs, but it seemed like she never fully grasped the gravity of the situation, and instead of offering support, she'd often offer unsolicited opinions about how I should handle him. A few months ago, Sarah invited me and Lucas to her house for a get-together. It had been a while since we'd seen each other, so I agreed. Lucas was excited because he loves going to new places and meeting new people, although I always have to keep a close eye on him. When we arrived, Sarah was all smiles, and we caught up for a bit while Lucas played with some toys she had for him. After a while, Lucas started to get overstimulated. He's very sensitive to noise, and there were several kids running around and playing loudly, which upset him. He started covering his ears and crying, and I immediately went to comfort him. Sarah's tone changed, and she started acting uncomfortable. I didn't think much of it at first, but then I noticed that she was making side comments to some of her other guests about how hard it must be to deal with Lucas's behavior. She said things like, "I don't get how you can handle it when he just starts crying for no reason." like he's fine, but then suddenly he's losing it over the smallest thing. I didn't want to cause a scene in front of everyone, but I was visibly upset. I took Lucas into a quieter room to calm him down, and we stayed there for a while. When I came out, I was hoping to address the situation calmly with Sarah, but I didn't have the chance. Later that evening, we were sitting in her living room, and Lucas had finally calmed down enough to play with a toy that Sarah had set up. I was chatting with a couple of other people, but I was still keeping an eye on him. At some point, Sarah came over and sat down next to me. She leaned in and, in a quieter voice, said something that completely shocked me. She said, "I don't know if I could ever handle having a kid like Lucas. It just seems exhausting, you know? You're such a great mom, but I feel like you must be constantly stressed out, and I wouldn't want to deal with that." I froze. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I've never ever heard her speak like this about my child. My son, who was in the next room, trying to calm down from an overstimulating experience, didn't deserve to be talked about like that. It was like she completely disregarded everything I had shared about Lucas's diagnosis and how hard we've worked as a family to make sure he's taken care of. I didn't know how to respond. I was so hurt that I couldn't even find the right words. I just told her that I thought it was a really inappropriate thing to say and that she didn't understand how hard I've worked to make sure Lucas has a good life. I then got up and told her that we were leaving. I grabbed Lucas's stuff, and we left immediately. The drive home was quiet. Lucas didn't seem to notice anything was wrong, but I was fuming. I've been thinking about what happened ever since, and I've decided that I can't be around someone who has such a lack of empathy toward my son. It wasn't just the comment itself. It was the way she acted like Lucas's needs were a burden to me. I've been nothing but supportive of her over the years, and yet she could say something so hurtful about my child. I feel like she doesn't truly care about my family, and that's not something I can ignore anymore. The next day, I texted Sarah to let her know that I was upset by what she said. I told her that I needed some time to think, and that I didn't think I could continue the friendship the way it had been. I tried to be polite and explained that I didn't feel comfortable with her comments, but she immediately responded with a defensive text, saying that I was overreacting and that she didn't mean to offend me. She said I was too sensitive and that everyone was talking about how difficult kids can be these days, and it was just a joke. She even mentioned that I was being unfair to her by making her feel like a bad person when she was just expressing her feelings. I didn't respond after that. I didn't feel like I needed to explain further. I just blocked her on social media and stopped replying to her texts. It's been 2 weeks since that night, and she hasn't reached out since. Some of our mutual friends have reached out to ask what happened, and I've explained the situation to them. Most have been supportive, but a few have said I should have given Sarah the benefit of the doubt and that I overreacted by cutting her off. I've thought about it a lot, and I honestly feel like I did the right thing. I can't keep a friendship with someone who doesn't show the respect and understanding my family deserves, especially when it comes to my son. But now I'm second-guessing myself. I'm wondering if I was too harsh by cutting her out of my life so abruptly. Maybe I should have given her another chance or tried to educate her further on autism and what Lucas and I go through. But in my heart, I feel like her words showed me that she doesn't understand or care about the challenges we face. So, AITA for telling my best friend she's no longer welcome in my home after she made a horrible comment about my child's disability? Thank you for watching until the end. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss new videos. Also, leave a comment. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Your support and engagement mean a lot to me. See you in the next video.